Hello, my name is Kate and welcome to our virtual walking tour, A Rainbow of Kenton County Houses. And as part of our summer reading celebration, Reading Colors Your World, we are exploring the histories of several colorful houses around the community. And to see our previous walking tours, you can visit our Kenton County Public Library Facebook or YouTube pages. And coming up on August 11th, we'll be visiting a purple house at 527 Russell. And on August 25th, we'll visit 703 Bakewell as our last stop on the tour. And today we'll be taking a look at the history of a blue house on 542 Greenup Street. And built in 1898, the home at 542 Greenup contains some elements of Queen Anne architecture. And some of these include a steeply pitched roof, a large elaborate porch, and several stained glass windows throughout the home, as pictured here in the stairwell. And Queen Anne style homes are known for being very ornate and also having an asymmetrical design. And while there's some ornate detailing on the porch, for example, the home is relatively subdued for a Queen Anne and contains just a few of the architectural elements. So this may be because it was built in 1898, which was at the end of the Queen Anne period, and that came to an end right around 1900. And the first occupants of the home were the Lott family, and this family consisted of George Gearhart Lott, his wife Nannie, and their son George Southgate Lott. And George Lott was born about 1843 in Pennsylvania, and Nannie Southgate was born about 1845 here in Covington. And she was the daughter of William Wright Southgate, who was a well-known Covington lawyer and politician of the time. And when they moved into the home, George Lott had been retired from the military for about 9 years. And prior to his retirement, he attended West Point, and when he was there in his first year, that was when the Civil War broke out. So he volunteered to fight in support of the Union. And after the Civil War, George remained in the Army, and during this time, he served in Texas and the Dakotas. And he and Nannie's son, George Southgate Lott, was born in 1884 in South Dakota, according to census records for the family. And during their time in Covington at 542 Greenup, the Lotts were very active in the community. And Major George Lott was a member of the Military Order of the Loyal Legion of the United States, which was a patriotic order that was organized for Union officers of the Civil War. And aside from the Loyal Legion, Major Lott was also a member of the Masonic fraternity. And George and Nannie were also recorded as members of Trinity Episcopal Church in Covington, and they appear in this image as members of the church in a record book, which spans from 1898 to 1904. And their address is listed as 542 Greenup, and this record comes from our GeNKY database. And the arrow at the top points to them, and the one at the bottom points to their son George, with a note that he was confirmed in the church in 1900. And in 1907, Nannie Lott made the Society News page of the Kentucky Post when her name was mentioned, as she had presided over the favor table for a Christmas cotillion, which was given by the Cotillion Club. And this event was held in Oddfellows Hall on Madison Avenue. And aside from the groups and organizations that George and Nannie were involved in, they also had some strong opinions against the proposed extension of 6th Street from Greenup to Sanford. And it was quoted that they believed this would impair the value of their property. And this appeared in the Kentucky Post in 1914 and was discussed as part of the weekly Covington Commissioners meeting. And their son, George Southgate Lott, was about 13 years old when the family moved into the home, and he attended school. And by the time of the 1910 census pictured here, he was 25 years old and was working as a broker. And in between that time, he did a bit of traveling. And in 1905, he ventured to both Niagara Falls and to Michigan. And his time in Michigan was for a month-long fishing trip to Georgian Bay. And in 1910, George Lott's engagement to Belle Bonser was announced. And they met while attending the University of Cincinnati. And their wedding took place at the home of Belle Bonser's parents. And afterward, they took a month-long honeymoon to Canada. And when they returned, they stayed with George's parents briefly, and that was before they relocated to Atlanta. And George and Nannie remained at the house for nearly 20 years until about 1917, before moving to another home in Covington. And this image of the Sanborn map shows 542 Greenup as of 1909. And in 1921, George Lott died after an illness, and he was buried in Highland Cemetery. And Nannie at this time went to go live with her son, George, who was then in Dayton, Ohio. And a couple of years later, she followed George in death, and their son, George Southgate Lott, lived in Montgomery County, Ohio for over 50 years, and he was buried with his parents and his wife in Highland Cemetery. And the next occupants of the home at 542 Greenup were the Keams, and this family consisted of Ben and Hazel and their two sons, Benjamin and Paul. And these two photos of Ben and Hazel are courtesy of an Ancestry user, Deborah F13. And Ben Keam was the owner and president of Monarch Auto Supply Company. And this company eventually grew to 2 locations. And one thing that the Keams had in common with the home's previous owners was that they also belonged to the Trinity Episcopal Church, and Hazel was the choir director there. And that was a position that she held and that she was involved in for nearly 40 years. And so the family moved in the early 1920s, and the 1930 census was the first census where they appeared in the home. And from that census, the value was stated at $8,700. By the 1940 census, the reported value had increased to $9,000. And this is John W. Thompson, and he was born in Dearborn County, Indiana. And during this time, he briefly lived with the family. He was Hazel's grandfather. And so John Thompson, he served in the Civil War in support of the Union in the 26th Indiana Infantry, and then he was later promoted to corporal. And he was also commander of the Noyes McCook Post number 30 of the Grand Army of the Republic, which was a fraternal organization that was composed of Union veterans of the Civil War. And when he was 87 years old, John Thompson died from pneumonia at the residence, at the Keam residence at 542 Greenup. And this was on October 25th, 1928, and he was buried at Spring Grove Cemetery in Hamilton County. And so, like the Lotts, the Keams were also very active in the community, and this was seen in some newspaper clippings from the time. And Ben was selected as VP of the Rotary Club in Covington in 1927. And a little while later, he also served as president of the club. And Hazel was very involved in PTA meetings and other events at her children's school. And she used some of her musical talents when she sang several songs at the October 1927 PTA meeting. And this is Lena Keam, and this is Ben's mother, and Lena also lived with them in the home, and this was a little bit later in 1937, and Lena passed away in the home, leaving behind 3 sons who also worked for Monarch Auto Supply, and also 2 daughters and several grandchildren. And this photo of her is also courtesy of an ancestry user. And so the next several years brought exciting changes for the family. And in 1932, Ben joined his father's company, Monarch Auto Supply, and this little note was published in the Homespun, which was a publication of Holmes High School. And many of these are accessible digitally through our GeNKY database on our website. And the Keam sons, Ben and Paul, both attended Holmes High School, and the family had an exciting event to celebrate on the evening of June 16th, 1936, when Paul Keam graduated and graduated the high school with 16.5 credits. And like the Homespun publications, this commencement booklet and others are also accessible through our GeNKY database. And these are the 2 World War II draft cards for the Keam sons. Ben's draft card is on the left and Paul's is there on the right. And at the time, both of the sons were living at the home at 542 Greenup. And around this time, they were also both attending the University of Cincinnati, which is where they met each of their spouses. And Ben married a woman named Martha in 1942, and Paul, he enlisted in the military in 1941, and he served in England until 1943. And after serving in the military, Paul Keam married Grace Schroetter in May of 1943. And these are a couple of photos from our Faces and Places database. We have several photos of Grace's family from the Schroetter collection. And Ben Jr. is pictured in the middle on the picture, on the left, and then Grace Schroetter Keam, his wife, is on the far right in the other photograph. And these are some additional photos of Grace from the Schroetter collection. 2 of these show her around age 3 in June of 1919 at the family's home on Eastern Avenue. And Grace is also pictured here with her sister, Emma Louise, who's standing on the right in that photo, and Grace is on the left. And as the children grew up and they moved out on their own, the Keams continued to stay busy. Ben opened his second location of the Monarch Auto Supply, and that was located at 722 Scott. And Hazel was very active with volunteer work. And these are a couple of articles about her involvement with the Crippled Children's Society. And for both of these fundraisers, Hazel invited the public to her home to raise money for the society. And one was a musical program, and the other event was a silver tea and toy sale. And this was to raise money for the Christmas party for the children. And as they were now empty nesters, Hazel and Ben also enjoyed a bit of traveling. And through passenger lists, which are available on Ancestry Library Edition, we're able to track some of their travels. And one of their trips took them to Hawaii. And this photo on the left is courtesy of an Ancestry user and shows Ben and Hazel enjoying Honolulu, and they're sporting some flower leis in January of 1949. And following this trip, they took a cruise to Rio de Janeiro in 1952, England in 1953, and then a cruise to Trinidad in 1955. And on the right is the image from the record for their Trinidad cruise. And this record mentions the ship, their port of departure in Alabama, and it also mentions their names and ages. And the last piece of information is that it states their address here as 542 Greenup. And the Keams lived at the home for over 30 years until about 1957 when they moved to a house on Scott Street. And this photo of Hazel Keam was taken in 1980, many years afterwards, but I wanted to include it. And this comes from our Faces and Places database. And it was part of a Kentucky Post story done on Hazel. And in this story, she was recognized as the oldest volunteer at Booth Hospital. She was 89 years old, and she was pictured driving the hospital cart with cards, magazines, and some other items for patients. And with the Keams moving out of the home, there was a new occupant that moved in, and this time the home began to be used as a business space. And O.G. Loomis and Son engineers moved in. So Orville Loomis was in business with his son, Robert G. Loomis, and they did consulting work. And Orville Loomis graduated from the University of Cincinnati in 1925 with his engineering degree. And then over on the right is a newspaper article from 1966, and this tells his winning of the 1966 Distinguished Service Award from the Kentucky Society of Professional Engineers. And they noted here that Loomis typifies the solid professional engineer. And so a couple of years after Loomis opened his business, another tenant opened a business in the Greenup home. And on the 1st of January 1959, Lila Cooney, who was a well-known artist in the area at the time, she began renting space on the second floor of the home, and she used this as studio space. And in a Kentucky Post article from the time, she said that since she had acquired her very own studio, she's painted more than previously and had not had to curtail her many other activities. And before opening the studio space, she worked and painted out of her apartment, which was across the street. She lived at the Arthur Apartments, and Lila Cooney was a member of the Covington Art Club. And over the years, her work appeared in local galleries and exhibits. She was also an art instructor, and she would teach classes in Dayton, Ohio, as well as locally at Baker Hunt. And these photographs here are from our Faces and Places database, and these are photos of her and her artwork that were taken mainly in the late 60s and the early 1970s. And her work focused primarily on abstract oil paintings and also sketches. And so the Loomis Company remained at the home until the early 1980s, and then 542 Greenup changed hands again. And that was when architect William Hubb took ownership of the property. And Lila Cooney kept her studio there until around the late 80s, so a little over 25 years. And this is Hubb pictured in front of the home when he first opened it as an office in 1983. And one kind of interesting note about the home during this time was that a severe storm actually blew the roof off of the home in 1986. And in 1995, Gene Weber, a longtime employee, he became partners with William Hubb, and the firm then became known as Hubb and Weber. And over the years, the firm has designed a variety of structures, and some of these have included medical buildings, housing complexes, movie theaters, and also car dealerships, among among others. And in 2004, the firm's founder, William Hubb, passed away, and the company continued operating in the house until 2012, and that was when they moved to another space on Pike Street. And then it once again became a residential dwelling, and in 2018, it won a beautification award from the Friends of Covington. And I hope that you've enjoyed this look at the history of the Blue Home at 542 Greenup. And if you have any questions, please send us an email at history@kentonlibrary.org. Give us a call at 859-962-4070 or visit us on the web at kentonlibrary.org/genealogy. And be sure to tune in next week as we continue our walking tour where we'll explore a purple house at 527 Russell. Thanks for watching.